Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are looking at a figure who is, quite frankly, too big to fit in a box. I'm looking at the stack of notes we have here, and it is intimidating. We're talking about a man whose life feels less like a biography and more like a mythological epic that he, wrote himself.
It really is a subject that tends to consume everything around it. We are discussing Richard Wagner, and you are absolutely right about the scale. We aren't just talking about a composer. We are talking about a cultural phenomenon that, well, it basically split the world in two.
It really does seem binary with him. People don't just kind of like Wagner. I've seen quotes where he is described as a god, the savior of art, and then you have others describing him as a literal plague.
The French composer Charles Valentin Elkin is probably the most famous example of that. He said, "Wagner is not a musician, he is a disease." And that sentiment, it wasn't uncommon. The polarization was immediate, violent, and it has lasted for 140 years. You are either a Wagnerian, completely devoted to the cult, or you are actively repulsed by him. There's very little middle ground.
So our mission today is to figure out why. We've got his autobiography, Mein Leben, his very heavy theoretical essays like opera and drama, and historical accounts ranging from his friendship with Friedrich Nietzsche to the horrific appropriation of his work in the 20th century. We need to understand how a guy who spent half his life running from loan sharks managed to revolutionize the entire concept of art.
And we have to do that while holding two very difficult truths in our heads at the same time. One, he created the music drama, which is, it's the foundation of modern cinema and storytelling. Two, his worldview and legacy are entangled with some of the darkest ideologies in human history. It's a paradox, a massive one.
A huge paradox. So let's start at the beginning then, because when I think of Wagner, I think of emperors, custom-built theaters, velvet robes. I don't picture a kid born in the Jewish quarter of Leipzig.
That is where it starts, though. May 23, 1813, at the House of the Red and White Lions in the Brühl district. And right out of gate, there is ambiguity. There's a mystery.
Ambiguity about what? His family?
About his father. His legal father was a man named Karl Friedrich Wagner, a police clerk. But Karl died of typhoid fever when Richard was only 6 months old. And almost immediately, suspiciously fast, his mother, Johanna, moved in with a man named Ludwig Geyer.
Geyer, who was he?
He was an actor, a playwright, and a close friend of the family. They married very quickly, and for the first 14 years of his life, Wagner didn't even use the name Wagner. He was known as Wilhelm Richard Geyer.
Wait, so he didn't know he was a Wagner. He thought he was a Geyer.
He grew up believing Geyer was his father, and later in life, looking back, Wagner found evidence letters, timelines, things that made him strongly suspect Geyer was his biological father all along.
Does that matter, other than just being a bit of family drama?
Oh, it matters immensely for his psychology. Geyer had a background in the theater, which is almost certainly where Wagner got that artistic spark. But Geyer also came from a family that had potential Jewish roots, though Geyer himself was Protestant.
Wow.
Given Wagner's later virulent anti-Semitism, the fear, the persistent rumor that he himself might be of Jewish descent via Geyer became a source of massive, torturous insecurity for him. It haunted him.
That is a heavy psychological load to carry from childhood. But you mentioned the theater influence, so I assume he was a prodigy, like Mozart writing concertos at age 5.
Far from it. That's the funny thing. He wasn't a natural musician in the technical sense at all. His Latin teacher tried to teach him piano, and it was a complete disaster. Wagner refused to practice his scales. He just wanted to bang out theater overtures by ear.
Hold on. He's one of the most harmonically complex composers in history, and he couldn't play his scales. How does that even work?
He heard the drama first. That's the key. He wasn't interested in the technique of the instrument. He was interested in the emotional impact of the sound. He was a dramatist who learned to use music as a tool. His real awakening didn't come from a piano lesson. It came from two things. Hearing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, which he transcribed for piano by hand.
Which is insane in itself.
Completely insane, and seeing a very specific performance.
The singer.
A dramatic soprano named Wilhelmine Schroeder-Devrient. He saw her perform, we think it was, as Leonore in Beethoven's Fidelio. He wrote later that it wasn't just her voice, it was the almost demonic fire in her acting. She threw herself into the role with such ecstasy that it terrified and thrilled him. That was the moment. He realized that music shouldn't just be pretty melodies. It should be an ecstatic, overwhelming theatrical experience.
So he catches the bug. He decides, this is what I'm going to do.
Does he go straight to the top?
He goes straight to the bottom. He enrolls in Leipzig University, takes some composition lessons, and starts working in these tiny provincial theaters. Würzburg, Magdeburg. Small towns, small-time jobs. And this is where the second defining theme of his life appears. Absolute financial chaos.
He was bad with money. Bad is the understatement of the century. He had a hole in his pocket the size of the Grand Canyon. He felt he was entitled to luxury silks, perfumes, fine apartments, regardless of his income, which was usually zero. He started borrowing money from everyone he met and simply never paying it back. It was a compulsion.
And amidst this financial mess, he gets married. Of course he does.
To Minna Planer. She was a leading lady, a very successful actress. They married in 1836. And it was, to put it mildly, a complete train wreck.
In what way?
Well, for starters, 6 months after the wedding, she ran off with a merchant named Dietrich.
6 months.
6 months. She eventually came back, but the dynamic was set. They were two volatile, artistic people drowning in debt, constantly fighting. By 1839, they were in Riga, in modern-day Latvia, and the debt situation had become criminal. The authorities were involved. Their passports were seized.
So they're trapped in Latvia with creditors closing in? That sounds like a movie.
It basically was. They had to run. This is the Great Escape. They couldn't leave legally, so they had to be smuggled across the border at night to the coast. They boarded a small merchant vessel called the Thetis, which was bound for London.
Nice cruise to calm the nerves.
It was a nightmare. The ship was tiny. The North Sea was furious. They hit 3 violent storms. The captain had to seek shelter in the Norwegian fjords just to keep from sinking. Imagine this. Wagner's terrified, seasick, thinking he's going to die. But as they're hiding in these fjords, he hears the sailors' calls echoing off the granite walls, the wind howling through the ribbing.
And his brain just goes, I can use this.
Exactly. He wasn't just surviving, he was taking notes. That voyage is the direct one-to-one inspiration for Der Fliegende Holländer, the Flying Dutchman. The music of that opera is the sound of that storm. He captured the terror of the ocean and the legend of the ghost ship doomed to sail forever. He felt like he was the Dutchman, a man condemned to wander.
They survive the trip, they land in London, and eventually they head to Paris. Paris in the 1840s, that's the place to be for an artist, right? The center of the world.
If you're successful, yes. If you're Wagner, it was a complete and utter humiliation. He spent 2 years there, from 1839 to 1842, in abject poverty. We are talking about the man who would write the Ring Cycle, and he's sitting in a freezing garret arranging popular opera tunes for the cornet just to buy bread.
Wow. That has to be damaging to the ego.
It made him bitter. He felt the Parisian musical establishment, which was dominated by flashy, commercially successful grand opera, was rejecting him. He wrote these novelettes for newspapers about a German musician dying of starvation in Paris. It was all very self-pitying. But crucially, he was also soaking up ideas. He was attending lectures, reading history, and he finally got a break.
In Germany.
Yes. His opera Rienzi, which is this massive 5-act grand spectacle, very much in the French style he claimed to hate, was accepted by the Dresden Court Theater. He and Minna scraped together the money to travel back to Germany in 1842. The opera premiered, and it was a smash hit.
Just like that.
Just like that. Overnight, he went from a starving refugee to the Royal Saxon Court conductor, Kapellmeister, one of the most prestigious musical jobs in Germany.
That is absolute whiplash. 1 minute you're arranging cornet tunes for pennies, the next you're the royal conductor. You'd think he would just settle down, enjoy the salary, and finally pay off his debts.
You would think. But Wagner was constitutionally incapable of settling down. He was in Dresden during the 1840s, a time when all of Europe was just bubbling with revolution. Wagner, instead of joining the courtly social circles, fell in with a crowd of radical intellectuals.
Who are we talking about here?
People like Mikhail Bakunin.
The Russian anarchist.
Yes.
The father of anarchism.
That's the one. Wagner and Bakunin were hanging out, debating late into the night. Wagner started reading Proudhon and Feuerbach. He became convinced that the entire social structure of Europe, the aristocracy, capitalism, the very theater system that employed him, was rotten to the core. He believed that for true art to exist, the old world had to be burned down.
A royal conductor wanting to burn down the monarchy. That's a bit of a conflict of interest.
To say the least. And it came to a head in 1849, the May Uprising in Dresden. The revolutionaries took to the streets to overthrow the King of Saxony. And Wagner wasn't just watching from his window, he was printing revolutionary pamphlets. He was reportedly in the watchtower ringing the bells to signal the rebels. He was procuring hand grenades.
He was a full-on revolutionary. And when the uprising failed,
it was brutally crushed by Prussian troops. Bakunin was arrested and sentenced to death, though it was later commuted. Wagner, realizing he was a wanted man with a warrant out for his arrest, fled. He left his wife, his job, his success, and ran to Switzerland with the help of his friend Franz Liszt.
So begins exile number 2.
And this is the most critical period of his life. He spent 12 years in exile, mostly in Zurich. He was depressed, he was isolated, and he couldn't get his operas performed back in Germany. So he stopped composing.
You stopped writing music. For how long?
For about 6 years, he barely wrote a note of music. Instead, he wrote books. He needed to explain to himself and to the world what went wrong and what the future of art should look like. This is when he wrote The Artwork of the Future and the massive, dense tome, Opera and Drama.
And this is where he comes up with the big German word, Gesamtkunstwerk.
Gesamtkunstwerk, the total work of art. Wagner looked at the opera of his day, Rossini, Meyerbeer, and he hated it. He felt that composers were just using the drama as a flimsy excuse to string together catchy songs, arias, so the singers could show off. He famously said, "The mistake in the art genre of opera is that the means of expression, music, has been made the object, while the object of expression, the drama, has been made a means."
Okay, unpack that for me. What does it actually mean?
He means the story should be the boss. The drama is everything. The music, the poetry, the set design, the lighting, the acting. They are all equal partners serving one single purpose: to express the drama. No more stopping the show for a 5-minute solo where the soprano stands at the front of the stage and trills about her feelings.
So it's continuous.
The music must never stop. It must flow continuously like a river, mirroring the stream of consciousness of the characters. He called it endless melody.
So he invents the music drama, and he decides he has to write everything himself to achieve this.
Yes. No more working with a librettist. He would write the play, he would write the music, he would design the staging. He viewed it as a single, unified entity that could only come from one creator. And while he was constructing this grand theory, he discovered a philosopher who gave him the metaphysical framework for it all: Arthur Schopenhauer.
Right, we mentioned him in the intro, the great pessimist.
In 1854, a friend introduced Wagner to Schopenhauer's book, The World as Will and Representation. It hit Wagner like a lightning bolt. Schopenhauer argued that the universe isn't driven by reason or God, but by a blind, irrational, insatiable force he called the will. This will is what drives all our desires for sex, for hunger, for power. And because the will can never truly be satisfied, life is essentially suffering.
Cheerful stuff.
Very. Schopenhauer argued that the only way to find peace is to deny the will, to renounce desire, to achieve a kind of Buddhist-like negation of the self and turn away from the world.
That seems like the absolute opposite of Wagner, the revolutionary who wanted to burn down cities and buy silk underwear.
It was a massive contradiction, but Wagner embraced it intellectually. He moved from being a political revolutionary who wanted to fix the world to a metaphysical one who wanted to transcend the world. You see this shift in his work almost immediately. His characters stop trying to win political battles and start looking for redemption through death or renunciation.
And he decides to apply all this theory, the total art, the continuous music, the Schopenhauer, to the biggest project in the history of music, the Ring cycle.
Der Ring des Nibelungen. It is just staggering to think about. He started writing the text back in 1848 and didn't finish the music until 1874. That's 26 years.
26 years on one project. For someone who hasn't seen it, just give us the scale. What are we looking at?
We are looking at about 15 to 16 hours of music. It's intended to be seen over 4 consecutive nights. There's a preliminary evening, Das Rheingold, and then 3 main days, De Walküre, Siegfried, and Götterdämmerung, which means Twilight of the Gods.
And the story.
The plot spans generations. It starts with the creation of the world and ends with the apocalypse. It involves gods, giants, dwarves, dragons, magic swords, and a magic ring that brings misery to everyone who owns it. It is Lord of the Rings. Literally, Tolkien drew heavily from the same Norse and Germanic myths, but set to the most complex and dense music ever written up to that point.
And this is where the leitmotif comes in. We hear that term a lot in film class, but how did Wagner actually use it?
Well, before Wagner, composers had themes or reminiscence motives, but Wagner weaponized them. A leitmotif is a short musical phrase that's associated with a specific person, an object, like the ring or the sword, or an idea like fate or a curse.
Can you give me a concrete example?
Sure, let's say there's a motif for a secret. It's a slippery, quiet little melody. Now, imagine a character is on stage telling a lie. He's saying, "I have nothing to hide, I'm telling you the truth." But while he's saying that, you, the audience, hear the secret motif playing quietly in the orchestra.
So you know he's lying. The orchestra is tipping you off.
The orchestra becomes the narrator. It tells you the subtext, the inner thoughts, the things the characters can't or won't say. It's profoundly psychological.
And they change over time.
Completely. And this is the genius of it. They evolve. If a hero grows up and becomes stronger, his motif might change from a simple horn call to a grand brass fanfare. If the ring is cursed, the ring motif might warp and become distorted, played in a minor key. By the end of the 16-hour cycle, there are dozens of these motifs weaving over, under, and through each other. It's a thick web of meaning. You aren't just listening to music. You are decoding a subconscious map of the entire drama.
That sounds absolutely exhausting to write. I can't even imagine.
It was, and in the middle of writing it, specifically in the middle of Act 2 of Friedrich Wagner, he stopped. He put the pen down and didn't pick up the ring again for 12 years.
12 years. Why? Just writer's block on a colossal scale.
It was a combination of things. He felt it was impractical, that no theater could ever stage it. But the main reason was love trouble and money trouble. But mostly love.
Of course.
While in Zurich, he was living in a small cottage on the estate of a wealthy silk merchant and patron named Otto Wesendonck. Wagner naturally fell madly in love with Otto's wife, Mathilde.
He has a habit of this, doesn't he?
He does, and this was an intense, intellectual, spiritual passion. They likely didn't consummate it physically, but the emotional affair was raging. He was miserable because he couldn't have her, and he channeled all of that misery, that unfulfilled longing, that desire for a love that could only exist outside of life into a new opera, Tristan and Isolde.
This is the one. This is the one that music nerds always point to as the beginning of modern music. Why is that? What's so special about it?
It boils down to the very first chord of the opera, the Tristan chord.
What's so special about a single chord?
Think of traditional Western music as having a home. You start at home, the tonic key, you go on a journey of tension and different chords, and then you resolve back home. It's satisfying. The Tristan chord is pure, unresolved tension. It's dissonant. And instead of resolving to a comfortable home chord, it just slides into another dissonant, tense chord, and then another.
So it never goes on.
Not for 4 hours. The entire opera is a constant state of yearning, of reaching for a resolution that never comes. It perfectly mirrors the psychological state of the characters, Tristan and Isolde, whose illicit love is so intense it can't exist in the real world. They can only find their resolution, their home, in death.
That sounds incredibly stressful to listen to.
It creates a physical reaction in the listener. It's intoxicating. It's the sound of obsession. Wagner wrote to Mathilde that the opera was terrible and that a perfect performance of it would drive people mad. When it was finally performed, it completely bewildered people. It broke the rules of harmony so thoroughly that it opened the door for everything that came later. Atonality, Schoenberg, jazz, all of it.
So he finishes this masterpiece of yearning. What happens with Mathilde in the real world?
His wife, Minna, intercepted a letter. The whole situation with him living in the cottage, which they called the exile or asylum, just blew up. Wagner had to flee again. He went to Venice, then back to Paris. He tried to stage his earlier opera Tannhäuser in Paris in 1861, and it was one of the most famous fiascos in theater history.
A fiasco? Why?
Because of the Jockey Club. These were a group of wealthy, arrogant young aristocrats who dined late and only came to the opera for the second act ballet so they could ogle the ballet dancers. Wagner, being an artistic purist, put the ballet in the first act, where it made dramatic sense.
Oh, no.
The Jockey Club arrived in Act 2, realized they'd missed the girls, and were furious. They had organized a protest, they handed out dog whistles to their friends, and literally whistled the opera off the stage for 3 straight nights.
That is petty on a level I can hardly comprehend.
It broke Wagner. By 1864, he is in his 50s. He is hiding from creditors again, moving between various German cities. He has no home, no money, and he feels his life's work. The Ring will never be finished or performed. He wrote farewell letters. He actually bought a pistol. He was seriously contemplating suicide.
And then the fairy tale happens.
It really is a fairy tale beat. A deus ex machina. King Ludwig II of Bavaria ascends the throne. He is 18 years old. He is tall, handsome, deeply eccentric, and he has been obsessed with Wagner's music since he was a boy. The very first thing he does as king is send a secretary to find Wagner. The secretary finds him in Stuttgart, about to flee again. He gives him a ruby ring from the king, pays off all his debts, and installs him in a beautiful villa in Munich.
Talk about a bailout. A royal bailout.
It was a total salvation. Ludwig became his patron, but it was a very intense and complicated relationship. Ludwig was homosexual and wrote Wagner letters that were overwhelmingly romantic. Oh, Holy One, my beloved, my only friend. Wagner, who desperately needed the money, played along. He manipulated the young king's affections to keep the cash flowing for his projects.
And while he's manipulating the king, he's creating another massive scandal.
The biggest one yet. He calls an incredible conductor, Hans von Bülow, to Munich to conduct the premiere of Tristan. Von Bülow is one of Wagner's most devoted disciples. He brings his wife, Cosima. Cosima happens to be the daughter of Franz Liszt, Wagner's old friend and benefactor.
I see where this is going.
Wagner and Cosima begin a passionate affair right under von Bülow's nose. Cosima actually bears Wagner 2 children, Isolde and Eva, while she is still married to von Bülow, who pathetically tried to pretend the children were his.
That's just brutal.
It was a huge public scandal. The king was humiliated when he finally found out. The press in Munich goes wild. Wagner is labeled a Lolus, a male version of Lola Montez, the scandalous mistress who had brought down Ludwig's grandfather from the throne.
So he gets kicked out of Munich. Even the king can't protect him.
The king had to ask him to leave to prevent a political revolt. So Wagner and Cosima, who eventually divorced von Bülow and married Wagner, moved to Switzerland again to a house called Krippchen. But Wagner had his eyes on a bigger prize. He didn't just want a house, he wanted a temple for his art.
He wanted a place to perform the Ring, a place built just for it.
Exactly. He knew the Ring was too big, too complex, and too innovative for a normal 19th century opera house with its box seats and social chatter. He needed a theater built specifically for it. He chose the small, nondescript town of Bayreuth in Bavaria.
Why there? Why not a major city?
Because it was in the middle of nowhere. That was the point. He didn't want people treating his opera like a social event, coming to chat and show off their dresses. He wanted them to make a pilgrimage, to travel there with the sole purpose of experiencing the art.
And the theater design itself was radical, right?
Completely revolutionary. It was the first democratic theater, no private boxes for the rich arranged in a horseshoe, just a single fan-shaped rake of seating, like a Greek amphitheater, so everyone had a good, clear view of the stage. The seats were hardwood. No comfort allowed. You were there to pay attention, not to relax.
And he turned off the lights.
That might be his most influential innovation. Before Wagner, the lights in the auditorium stayed on so people could read the program and, more importantly, look at each other. Wagner turned the lights out completely. He forced you to look at the stage, to be immersed.
And the mystic abyss. What was that?
The hidden orchestra pit. He designed it so the orchestra was sunk deep under the stage and covered with a wooden hood. You couldn't see the conductor. You couldn't see the violinist bowing. The sound just rose up from this invisible chasm, this mystic abyss, and mixed perfectly with the voices on stage. It was immersive. It was the first cinema experience, a century before cinema.
So the first festival happens in 1876.
It was the social and artistic event of the century. Emperor Wilhelm I of Germany was there, Emperor Pedro II of Brazil, King Ludwig of Bavaria, composers like Tchaikovsky, Bruckner, Saint-Saëns, his father-in-law Liszt, the philosopher Nietzsche. Everyone was there. They watched the world premiere of the full Ring cycle. Artistically, it was a triumph that changed music forever.
And financially.
A complete catastrophe. It ended with a massive deficit of about 150,000 marks. Wagner had to go on tour conducting concerts and even wrote the Centennial March for America for $5,000 just to try and pay it off.
Of course it did. It wouldn't be Wagner without a crushing debt story.
But the template was set. The Bayreuth Festival still runs today, and it's still controlled by the Wagner family.
Okay, we have to pivot now. This is the hard part. We've talked about the genius and the innovation. But we cannot talk about Wagner without talking about the hate that he espoused.
No, we can't. And we have to be very clear here. This isn't just a case of he was a man of his 19th century time and held some casual prejudices. Wagner was a virulent, vocal, and prolific anti-Semite. It was central to his worldview.
It all centers on his essay, Judaism in Music.
Das Judentum in der Musik. He published it first in 1850 under a pseudonym, but then, seeking more controversy, he republished it in 1869 under his own name with an extended preface. In it, he attacked Jewish musicians, specifically the late Felix Mendelssohn and his old rival Giacomo Meyerbeer.
What was his argument? What was he actually saying?
He argued that Jewish people were a foreign, alien element in European society, disconnected from the true national spirit, or Volksgeist. He claimed that because they were outsiders to the culture, they could only ever mimic or imitate European art. They couldn't create anything truly deep or soulful. He described their speech and singing as unpleasant and unnatural. It was vile, paranoid, hateful stuff.
And yet the great contradiction is that he had Jewish friends. He worked with them.
That's the maddening hypocrisy of it. He chose Hermann Levi, the son of a rabbi, to conduct the world premiere of Parsifal, his final, most Christian opera. He bullied Levi, he tried to get him to convert to Christianity, he insulted him constantly, yet he refused to let anyone else conduct the work because he knew Levi was the best conductor for the job. Wagner loved the individual who could serve his artistic purpose, but he hated the abstract collective.
And this hatred didn't die with him. It got picked up and amplified in the 20th century.
This is the darkest shadow of all. Adolf Hitler was a Wagner fanatic. He wrote in Mein Kampf that when he first heard Rienzi as a young man in Linz, in that hour it all began. He saw in Wagner's operas a glorification of the heroic Teutonic myth, the hero, the sword, the purity of blood, the struggle against corrupting forces.
So the Nazis just adopted him as their own.
Hitler made Bayreuth a state-sponsored shrine. He was extremely close friends with Winifred Wagner, Richard's English-born daughter-in-law, who ran the festival in the 1930s and 40s. The Nazis used Wagner's music at the Nuremberg rallies. It became, for many, the official soundtrack of the Third Reich.
But I've heard there was some conflict there, too. Not all the top Nazis loved it.
That's true. You have to remember, the operas are incredibly long, difficult, and philosophically complex. Goebbels, the propaganda minister, found them tedious. And Alfred Rosenberg, the chief Nazi ideologue, actually hated Parsifal. He thought its message of compassion, pity, and pacifism was weak, Christian, and un-German. But Hitler's personal obsession overrode all of that.
And what about the concentration camps? You hear stories about his music being played there to torture prisoners.
It's a common belief, but most historical evidence suggests Wagner was rarely, if ever, played in the death camps themselves. The SS officers considered the music too sacred to be heard by the prisoners. They played light operetta or marching music instead. However, in the very early days of the camp system, like at Dachau, there are accounts of it being used for re-education, blasting it at political prisoners to psychologically break them.
And this legacy is why, to this day, you can't really play Wagner in Israel.
Effectively, yes. There is an unwritten ban. Every time an orchestra conductor like Daniel Barenboim has tried to program a Wagner piece in Israel, there are protests, walkouts, and intense pain from the audience. For Holocaust survivors and their families, that music is inextricably linked to the sound of their trauma. You cannot and should not try to erase that association.
It's a stain that will never wash out. It's permanent. But before we finish, we need to touch on his other relationships, specifically with Nietzsche.
Friedrich Nietzsche. This is a real intellectual tragedy in itself. Nietzsche was a brilliant young professor of philology when he met Wagner. He idolized him. He saw Wagner as the rebirth of Greek tragedy, the artistic genius who would save German culture from mediocrity. They were incredibly close. Nietzsche practically lived at Wagner's home in Tribschen for a while.
So what happened? What caused the break?
Nietzsche grew up, and he watched Wagner change. He felt Wagner was selling out to a vulgar German nationalism, and even worse in Nietzsche's eyes, to Christianity. When Wagner wrote Parsifal, with its themes of the Holy Grail, Christian redemption, and pity, Nietzsche was utterly disgusted. He felt Wagner had betrayed his revolutionary atheistic roots and had knelt before the cross. Nietzsche wrote a series of blistering attacks, like the case of Wagner, calling him a decadence, a sickness. He famously said Wagner is a neurosis.
So he broke up with him via philosophy book.
It was a brutal intellectual takedown, but it broke Nietzsche's heart, truly. He loved the man, or the idea of the man, but hated what he believed he became.
Let's zoom out to the modern day then. We've covered the heady stuff. But if I go to the movies today, am I hearing Wagner?
You're hearing him everywhere. If you listen to John Williams' Star Wars, Harry Potter, Indiana Jones, you are listening to Wagnerian techniques. The Imperial March, that's a leitmotif. The Force theme, that's a leitmotif. The way the music tells you exactly what Luke Skywalker is feeling, even when he says nothing. That is pure Wagner. He invented the language of film scoring.
And Lord of the Rings, obviously. The parallels are just too strong.
Howard Shore's score is a direct descendant. It's a massive system of leitmotifs, and the story itself, the cursed ring, the broken sword that must be reforged, the dragon guarding a hoard of gold, Tolkien always denied a direct influence, but the DNA is undeniably there.
And something I found surprising, the heavy metal connection.
Joey DeMaio of the band Manowar famously called Wagner the father of heavy metal. And when you think about it, it makes perfect sense. The sheer volume, the bombast, the obsession with Norse gods and epic mythology, the themes of doom and power and heroic struggle. If you stripped away the violins and added a wall of distorted guitars, De Walker is basically a concept album for a power metal band.
Even the people who hated him couldn't escape him.
Nobody could. Debussy called him an old poisoner, but was still deeply influenced by his harmonies. T.S. Eliot quotes Tristan and Isolde directly in The Wasteland. Ud und leeres Meer, desolate and empty the sea. The modernists, the people who built 20th century culture, they all had to grapple with him. James Joyce, Thomas Mann, you couldn't ignore him, whether you loved him or loathed him.
So we reach the end. Wagner moves to Venice for his health in his later years.
Yes, he had a serious heart condition. He rented the Grand Palazzo Justinian on the Grand Canal. On February 13, 1883, after an argument with Cosima, he had a massive, fatal heart attack. He reportedly died in her arms.
And he was buried back in Bayreuth.
In the garden of his home, his villa that he named Wanfried, which means something like peace from delusion.
There's one final image I want to leave our listeners with. It's from the premiere of his very last opera, Parsifal, in 1882.
The 16th and final performance of that first festival season.
Right. Wagner is old, he's frail, he's been forbidden by his doctors from conducting, but during the third act, he secretly slips down into the mystic abyss, into that hidden orchestra pit.
He took the baton from the conductor, Herman Levi, the man he so often tormented. The audience couldn't see him, the singers on stage couldn't see him, but the orchestra, they saw him.
And he conducted the final act of his final opera himself, anonymously. The musicians later said the sound changed, that they could feel a different energy coming up from the pit.
He needed to control his artistic universe until the very last note. He died just a few months later.
And that leaves us with the big question, the Wagner paradox. We have the man who wrote some of the most beautiful, transformative, profound music in human history music that taught us how to feel things we didn't know we could feel. And we have the man who is a narcissist, a cheat, a virulent bigot, and an icon for one of history's most hateful regimes.
Can you separate them? The art from the artist?
Can you? Can you listen to the Ride of the Valkyries without thinking of the helicopters in Apocalypse? Now, or more chillingly, the rallies in Nuremberg.
I don't think you can fully separate them. And in a way, Wagner himself didn't want you to. He insisted his art was a direct expression of his worldview. But perhaps the true challenge, the maturity of a culture, is the ability to hold two opposing ideas at once. That a work of art can be magnificent and transcendent, and its creator can be a monstrous human being.
It's not a comfortable conclusion, but then with Wagner, nothing is ever comfortable.
No, it is simply loud, overwhelming, and utterly, completely undeniable.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.